Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Barry Beckham. If you're a YouTube viewer, I'm sure you know the drill by now, but please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. You'd also do me a great service if you have the opportunity to share this video with other photographers. Please do. These four images were taken quite some time ago at a botanical gardens. I had the camera on a tripod, but I think the sort of issues that we face here are pretty typical to many photographers. Now, we needed a tripod here for a couple of reasons, but the main reason was I was using a medium telephoto lens. You can see that it was 105mm. So we're focusing quite close, we're filling the frame with the flowers, so to be able to hand hold that camera, and I seem to remember these were in a bit of an awkward position down quite low, so it's not as though you can brace yourself. So the tripod was needed for that alone. We were outdoors, of course, so there was a little bit of movement from the natural wind around. We can see when we look at the images that the exposure was about right. But we do have quite contrasty conditions, and that does make the foreground flowers clash just a little bit with the background, even though it's out of focus. But if we look at the settings of the first image, you'll notice that I've bracketed a little bit with the shutter speed and the aperture. In the first one, a 60th of a second, well, from a tripod that should be pretty good. That should freeze the little movement that we had from the breeze that was around at the time, but f8, it's not quite enough to get the entire flower sharp enough. If we look at number 2, now we've gone to f11, which makes the flower a little bit sharper from foreground to background, but now we're down to a 30th of a second. Not a great problem if we've got some patience and we can wait until the flower is absolutely still. And the other two are very similar. The one on the extreme right, you notice that I reduced the ISO to 100 there. But to save opening all of these up individually, I'm going to say that number 3 is the one that we really need to open to manipulate. At f16, I've got what I would call acceptable sharpness. I think there's two types of sharpness we can talk about in a photograph. One of them is critical sharpness and one is acceptable sharpness. I don't think I've got critical sharpness here. I would have needed to have a smaller aperture, or I'd need to back away a little bit, maybe make the flowers smaller and cropping a little bit later. But I've got a good result to start with. f16, 400 ISO. We'll take a look at the noise in that when we open it in Adobe Camera Raw. But a 15th of a second, so even though we were shooting from a tripod, there's a chance we could have some softness here if we hit the button just at the point when the breeze moves the flower. Well, that didn't happen, so let's open that number 3 image up into Adobe Camera Raw. Now, as you can see, I've opened up 2 images, so in actual fact I've changed my mind just a little bit. I did want to show you the difference between the two. We're currently viewing the image I'd like to work with, but if I just select the other one, this one was the shot which was 100 ISO. But we had a much shallower depth of field at f8, and as we can see here, it's clearly inadequate. So you can see what I mean when I select this one as the image I'd like to go forward with. Now, I'm going to suggest that modern photography has evolved into 2 broad stages, the take-in stage and the manipulation stage. Both of those are now critical. We need to capture, in this case, an acceptably sharp image, something that has some wow value, a little bit of impact. But the crucial part is manipulating that image to get the best from it. My philosophy is pretty simple. I'll try to enhance what I think is good in the image, and I'll try to subdue what I think is offering competition to the main subject. I'm going to start by just moving my cursor down to the bottom left of the screen. Click the little icon to lose those two thumbnails up there. A little bit distracting and we don't need them now. Where do we start here? In normal circumstances, I would always say go to your optics and tick the box to remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. You can see my two are automatically ticked. I've got a preset created which applies that to save me a little time. But now I'm going to go to my basic tab, because normally we would be looking in here. We would be looking to adjust exposure, contrast, highlight shadows, certainly blacks, maybe clarity. But I don't think they're the biggest issue we've got. And whenever we manipulate an image, the first thing we need to do is the global editing, the editing that's going to affect the entire image, and then we move on to the more strategic. The problem here is the flowers, I think, are pretty dominant in the picture, but the background is too dominant. So I'm going to tackle both of those together, but I'm going to go straight to my colour mixer. Now the reason I'm choosing the colour mixer first is because in this particular shot we do have quite a distinction between the colours in the background and the colours of the flower. So we should be able to do quite a bit of work with this image just using the sliders here. But what I'm going to do is use them in conjunction with the targeted adjustment tool. I'm going to click to select that. And as I move onto the image, I can look around and say, well, there's a warm tone up the top there. If I click and drag to the left, if you look at the sliders over on the right, you can see the saturation of the yellows is going down. If I do the same with the green, I can take them down, and already we're making the background less obtrusive in our image. We've got some reds here. I'm not sure if we can affect them. Yes, we can. But now I'm going to switch to the luminance. But I'm going to stay with the targeted adjustment tool because I'm going to click on the light greens here and drop them down, and the warmer tones. Now you can see exactly what I'm doing here. I'm doing quite a lot of work on that background, and it's been quick and easy to do, and it hasn't affected the flower. But while we're here, well, why don't we look at the flower too? Let's go back to the saturation tab. Let's stay with the targeted adjustment. This time, let's move on to the flower's main colour and click and drag to the right. Look at the sliders. Moving to the right, a little bit of blues and more purple, of course, so we can put a bit more impact into the colour of the flower. Now I'd like to take you down to the bottom right, and we're going to click to see what we've done so far. Because with just the hue, saturation and luminance sliders, the colour mixer, look at the difference we've made. Now I think we can move up to the top and we can select that basic tab. Now we can look at one or two options here. I'm looking at the top right of the screen at the histogram as I'm speaking. We've got a slight deficiency way over on the right, and if I hover over that area and you look just below and to the centre of the histogram, there's a clue of where we may need to investigate the white slider. So let's go down to the whites and just move it a little bit to the right. All we're doing is giving the image look just a little more sparkle. We're not burning anything out. We're making the main subject leap out from that background a little more. We could decide to look at the exposure maybe and just drop it a little bit if we want a little bit more impact overall. That looks okay. Do we need any clarity? Probably some personal choice here, but maybe a little. And any more vibrance? Well, we've just spent a fair amount of time taking colour away. So if we put vibrance in here, we're going to make a difference to both the foreground and the background. Not a massive difference to the background, but I think if we take any at all, it needs to be just a small amount. I think I'm more or less happy with the global changes that I've made. Now I need to change to my strategic. A couple of little spots on the flowers that may need removing. And we've got a weakness over on the left hand side, a light tone right on the edge, and these two here, these two leaves, I think we can darken them considerably. Let's start on them by using a graduated filter. So if we go up to the top right of the screen and select it and go down to the bottom, I can click and drag. And of course what we're doing here, any changes we make are going to be solid at the green dot and transparent at the red, and they graduate in between. So we can make this distance as wide or as short as we need. I'm not sure we need it quite that far, but we'll take it to somewhere around there. I'm going to take, well, the exposure's already down a little bit from the last time I used this tool, so we'll reset it. I'll do something else as well. I'll hit the V key just to hide that selection for a moment. So you can see we can darken that down quite a bit. Touching the V again, I'm going to bring that up a little more. I can take the highlights down a little bit. Maybe a bit more of the exposure, and we're toning that down nicely. The problem in doing that, of course, we start to affect this leaf here, or this petal here. We can remove the effect of that graduated filter if we go up to the top right. Select the little eraser, and I've got my feather of this brush set to 100. The flow is quite high here, and the size is number 4. You can see the size. But what I want to do is just touch my control key and click to enlarge. I'll make my brush a little bigger with the square bracket keys, but you can see the sort of thing we can do. All I'm doing is removing the overspill, I suppose we could call it, and as I move up this petal it's going to be less and less noticeable until in the end we notice nothing at all. Well, at least we know the job's done. I can make my brush smaller using those square bracket keys to the right of the letter P, so I can go nicely down into this area. Now when I'm happy with that, and make sure, spend a bit of time going around the edge, but once we're happy with that, I'll hit Control 0, so we've got the best of both worlds there. Now let's take a look at one or two highlights with the adjustment brush. There's already been a couple of adjustments made here, so I'm going to double click and reset these, because all I want to do is to brush over this area. It leaves a pin, but you won't see anything there because I've not changed any of the sliders on the right hand side. So I'll drop down the highlights a little bit, but I think most of it's going to be exposure. So we'll drop that down and we'll brush into this area and we'll subdue down here as much as we feel is necessary. And I'll use the same brush to even add a little bit down at the bottom, and I'll look at one or two other areas too. We can make the brush bigger. We can also make the flow a lot less, so if you want it to work a little bit more gradual, you can do that. This is running away with me just a little bit, so I'll drop that down to 3 with the flow, so it's a little bit more measured, which means I have to go over the same area a number of times to create the effect I want, which generally works quite well. Now just one or two blemishes on the flower. I'm going to pick up the healing brush here. You can see the size is currently 14, but I can adjust that using the square bracket keys. The feather's set to 50, the opacity to 100. I'll zoom in, I think. Just give us a click. Actual fact, I thought it was a blemish, but it looks now like a bug. So we'll just make the brush a little bit bigger and we'll just click once. To make sure this is going to do a really good job, once again I often touch the V key, because if you can't see the repair you've just done once that bounding box is out of the way or that brush outline is out of the way, then we know we're okay. I'm going to hit Control 0 to zero in on the others. There's one there, so I'll zoom into them too. That one also looks like a bug. See what I mean? It looks good, therefore it probably is. That one too. This one I'll make the brush just a little bigger. That's worked okay, and one right on the edge there. Now that's not worked too well, so let's take a look why. If I touch the V key, we can see it's taking the repair from down here. That's the wrong place, isn't it? We're going to want it somewhere like that, aren't we? Jiggle this around a little bit and you'll get an adequate repair. Control 0. How many of these you choose to do, that's going to be personal as well. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom right of the screen and I'm going to click to open this as a smart object into Photoshop. Smart object just means we have access straight back into Camera Raw if we change our mind, and you can turn that on and off using the hyperlink at the center base of the Adobe Camera Raw screen. There's the little box to turn it on. Once you do turn it on, it'll stay turned on until you decide to remove it. In my case, I never do. Let's open this up into Photoshop. Now on the thumbnail over on the right hand side, we can see a little symbol down at the bottom corner. That's telling us we're working on a smart object, which means at any time I can double click. We're straight back into Adobe Camera Raw and I can make as many changes as I wish without doing any damage to the quality of my image. On this occasion though, I'll just cancel and come back out. And if you ever want to remove the Smart Object status, just go to the right of the thumbnail, right click and choose Rasterize. Now I don't think we're going to need it, so on this occasion I'll do so just to demonstrate what it's just done. But there are times when working on a smart object has some advantages. Now I think the only thing I'd like to do here is maybe just a little bit of vignetting around the outer edge, but only in strategic areas. So maybe we can take a look at a slightly different way of doing that. We could have done this in Adobe Camera Raw using the circular filter. We can do so here using selections. But let me just demonstrate a slightly different way, no better or worse. Maybe we could argue in this case a little bit more controllable. Well, wait until you see and you can make a decision for yourself. So let's go down to the adjustment layers down at the bottom right corner and click, and I want to select levels. And using the mid-tone slider, I'm going to move it to the right. I'm going to be a bit heavy-handed with this. Just take it down a little darker than I really want it, not much, and close this down. If you look over to the toolbox on the left hand side, you'll see that black is our foreground colour. I'm going to flood this mask with black. Now because black is our foreground colour, Alt Backspace will do that. So what we've done is to apply an adjustment layer, but then we've painted the layer mask in total black, so we've hidden all the effects that we've created. So now all we need to do is to go to the left hand side, switch to white, a soft edge brush, and we can just reveal those tones exactly where we want them. Now to save us going way over to the left hand side, what I could do is touch the X key. You'll notice that toggles the background and foreground colours. So I can bring the white to the foreground without having to travel over there. And I could touch the B key, which selects a brush. And because I know that I always work with the same soft edge brush and I haven't changed it, as I move my cursor onto the screen, I immediately see the size of the brush. I may want to make that brush bigger, but then my attention goes straight to the opacity and flow. The opacity I'm happy with at 100%, the flow is set to 10%. So all I need to do now is to wipe my brush over areas that I think need just a little more darkening. maybe the edges, but not all of the edges, because some of them are quite dark as they already are, if that's the right thing to say. But you can see I've got control of this now. 10% seems just about right, but I think you get the idea of what we're doing here. Now, we'd be saving our work as a Photoshop file regularly, but at some stage, of course, we'd be happy to go to the top right of the Layers palette and choose to flatten the image. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've got a new layer in the Layers palette. I created a new layer down at the bottom right of the layers, just to the left of the bin. And I've done a bit of work on the flower on the left-hand side using the spot healing brush. And I've placed this on a new layer so that I can turn it on and off. And you can take a look at that flower and appreciate that it's worth doing these things. These are the sorts of things I call attention to detail. But it's on a new layer, there's no risk to the image. Once we've got the work done and we're happy, then of course we can always reflatten. So here we come to the fun part of the video where we can compare the original image with the image we created. Now, we've done this with global editing and then strategic editing, but really all we've done is subdued anything that we felt was distracting, and we've enhanced the subject, in this case the flowers. Now, this is what I call bread and butter manipulation, and I'm not sure if that phrase is going to translate very well. But what it means is that within Photoshop we have so many techniques and tools to allow us to do some quite complex edits on our images. But the vast majority of the time, the sort of edits we need to do is exactly what we've just done here. Earlier on, I mentioned that when we got this image opened up into Camera Raw, we'd take a look at noise suppression. And I forgot all about it, but that's actually a good sign. Because while we was in Adobe Camera Raw, we enlarged this image a number of times. If there was a noise issue here, then it would have been more noticeable. The fact that it wasn't, and I actually forgot to deal with the noise, really isn't an issue for me. I'll see you next time.